Hi, my name's Nate, and I am working to make a dream come true, and that is race in off road. This is what I have right now. It's a third gen 4Runner 99. This is what it looked like when I grew up with it and all the way into adulthood. My parents bought it when I was 8 years old, and we took it on many road trips, many adventures, took it all over the United States, and even after college, continued to just get some exposure with off-roading and have a lot of fun with it. It's kind of become a obsession or a goal to take it further than that. Weekend off-roading is a whole lot of fun. However, I found it to be kind of expensive, and I kind of wheeled myself into debt. And I would go wheel, break parts, replace them, go wheel again, break parts, replace those too. And once I climbed out of that debt, I was like, you know what? That's all good and fun, but the the immediate midnight rush of trying to take care of parts and then drive to work the next day really isn't healthy. So I went ahead and bought another vehicle instead and continued to build this in the meantime. So, where was this after all that stuff subsided? It turned into an adventure truck, and we continued to take it all over the United States, from Texas to Moab to Colorado, all the way through it. And it's just a great vehicle to do that in. However, still wasn't enough. I wanted to have more fun racing it and also the process of building it. So I got the bug to go fast. I swapped out the suspension, used a long travel setup from Total Chaos, and made a rear coilover conversion in the back. So this is where kind of my shift happened with the truck. Rather than building it for general off-roading or off-roading without a plan, I set my sights on score. As a kid, I grew up just daydreaming about Ivan Stewart and his racing Toyotas, and that bug's never gone away. And now I want to do it with my own truck. So, race the 4Runner in score. We went from here, and our goal is here. The question is, how do we get there? We have to follow the rules, go through the registration process, and make a straight legal race truck, or a race legal race truck from this thing. That's the goal. Go have an adventure and learn a lot along the way. It's become kind of an obsession to understand it and do it in a cost-effective way. I can't pay someone to really figure this out for me. That's incredibly expensive. And it's expensive in parts alone. So since I have a professional know-how when it comes to making things, I thought, why not apply that to turning this thing into a race truck? So this is an example of a 3D model overlaid on top of the 4Runner as it sits. And it was a whole lot of fun getting there to both make the stuff and make it digitally. That was done with SolidWorks, and here's the physical example of what's actually inside the truck right now. The roll cage, I made it to where it would all drop through the body, so I could weld on the top portions of it, lift it up, and then weld it to the frame, and then continue the middle section after that. So this is an example of what it looks like when it's completely lifted up in position. And once I got to that point of welding all those tubes and all the reinforcing gussets done, that's when I welded the frame parts too. Here's an example of what it looks like. The coating is really shoddy on my part, so take that for what it's worth. I actually have to polish that and try that again. But here's examples of welding the roll cages to the frame of the truck. After that, I did leave the open weep holes for the frame. I might weld those up later. It all depends upon what the rule book or the guys at Score finally say. But those were welded all around. I did all of it with TIG welding. Still am. The roll cage is about 80% done. I have to do the gussets on the lower part of the roll cage in addition to the seats, and we'll get to that here in a bit. Every single tube is uniquely welded. Anytime that I'm welding up a node or where tubes intersect, even when the tubes crisscross and touch each other, each one of them is welded all the way around before the next one is fit up to it. That way there's a very, very good joint overlapping rather than having a big giant void where one could have had weld, but it didn't. So I tried really hard to make sure that that would happen anywhere that I had nodes that combined. Here's an example of what it looks like right now. Or it's actually, this is out of date now I think about it. There are additional tubes that are spanning across the bottom section of this. Let's see if I got a photo of that. Kinda, yeah. So here is what one of them looks like, going from the B pillar halfway to the A pillar. That thing is going to X out, and we will see that in the roll cage digital copy of it shortly. I started working with harnesses. They were expired. I went ahead and sent them back, and I'm getting ones that are actually current. I went ahead and swapped out the steering wheel earlier this week. Quick detach setups are really, really, really cool. This is what the harness bar looks like going across the back. I have ordered seats. They are on the way. They should be here late October, early November. And now for the fun stuff. I went ahead and made a representation of the vehicle in SolidWorks. SolidWorks is a 3D engineering program, and even though a lot of my eyeballing isn't perfect, you at least get an understanding of where this truck is headed from a build standpoint and what I want to do. What we have is a body. I made a body out of blueprints that I saw online and then just kind of fine-tuned it to make it look like my truck. And then also with the frame, found blueprints for the frame and just made a quick and dirty copy of that. Made a quick and dirty copy of the Shockworks bumpers and the sliders and the hardware that I had on the truck before building it to race Score. I have welded the rock sliders onto the frame. So I welded the roll cage to the sliders and the frame. What's cool about SolidWorks is that once you have actually modeled stuff, you can build things to scale or get it pretty darn close and get a good idea on how things actually relate together. I didn't have to figure out the drivetrain or anything like that digitally because that's the last thing I want to modify. I don't have a need to do that at this point. You can finish a race with a stock motor. It's very hard to be competitive with a stock motor. So anything that I would like to do with a V8 build or something like that has to come later. I have to be race legal first. And if I buy race car parts that are compatible with a V8 and can still work with the OEM V6 that I have, that's the win-win. So what does that look like? That looks like all of the racing equipment that's necessary to pass inspection and also more accurately save a life, because that's the whole point of inspection, is to make sure all of the equipment is that's necessary to save a life is actually in your vehicle. So of the pictures you saw earlier, I have a model of the roll cage in SolidWorks. I actually made the whole thing out of PVC in the truck first, and then used those to physically measure out what it would be in SolidWorks, and then took that information and bent the tubes that you actually see in the truck now. So again, let's just take this right here, quick and dirty, and compare it to what you can see in the truck currently. There is quite a bit of overlap, and I'm very pleased that that is the case. I've got a long way to go when it comes to making up gussets, but compared to the bulk of the fabrication, we're there. This thing is very close to getting done from a technical standpoint. Or like the roll cage is. The rest of it's still got a long way to go. Sorry. This tube I've not welded in yet because I'm concerned I might not be able to get the seats in there when I have put that in place. But other than that, the next thing that's part of the build plan for the roll cage is the seat mounts. The seat mounts are the red and yellow tubes that you see right here. The red is actually the one for the drivers. The yellow goes across the entire roll cage. And then there's also a tube for the passenger, and they merge together with the green tube you see there. Actually, let's get a better view of that. Okay. Yep. There you go. That's my current plan for those 4 tubes. It has changed many, 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 many times over the past couple of weeks. But while I am preparing for the seat's arrival, I'm going to be working on this in the meantime. So I will be working on making these bends a reality, and then going ahead and fitting them up in the truck. Ideally, once the seats are ready to be put in, it's just figuring out the final mounts that can actually connect them to the tubes, and call that a day and finish gusseting up the lower portion of the roll cage. This is an example of what it looks like from the front. These digital copies of the seats, I made them just using information I had available online, even though, sorry, they are made, the seats are PRP Podium Elites. They look kind of like this. So even though my headrests are a little off kilter and it's not a perfect representation of it, it gets the gist. The dimensions are right. The length, the width, the height, the bolt pattern, all of that information is there. So that's enough for me to work with fitting it in the truck as I currently have it, and can fine tune the tubes for it too. There will be some type of tabs that reach out and attach a mounting plate to the roll cage, and then the seats will be attached to that mounting plate. That way you can fine tune the forward, backward, and even the angle of them, rather than making one permanent mount that you can't change later without using an angle grinder. Other things that need to happen to the vehicle from a race standpoint, you need to have all the comms and communications. That is just a given. However, a lot of people don't understand you have to replace all of the fuel system as well. So there's 4 major areas of change this truck has to undergo. 1, it has to have a roll cage built into it. 2, you have to have the seats and harnesses. Then from there, you also have to have fire suppression, and then 4th, fuel. So the plan is to use a 50-gallon fuel cell, courtesy of Fuel Safe, or like they're the guys that make it. Definitely not sponsoring this or anything like that. And right now, Score is in a technical review for their newer generation of fuel cells that are, I'm not going to say they're plastic necessarily, but they are some type of roto molded impact rated polymer that meets FIA standards. So if that is the case, I will go that rather than the traditional ballistic route, ballistic fuel cell, because there's no expiration date on it for the quality of fuels that you're using, in addition to ethanol safe. Also, the bladders that are made out of ballistic woven nylon and fabrics usually degrade, and they also have a racing expiration of 3 years. So you have to replace that $2,000 part every 3 years. That's kind of a hard pill to swallow, especially when you're trying to do this in a cost-effective manner that's still safe. You can see what I did with the rear coilover conversion in the back. The fuel cell is going to have to sit behind that. It also has to sit behind the axle anyway. The race spec requires it to be far, far away from the occupants. And there's going to be a full-blown firewall that actually locks or that isolates the fuel cell from the occupants. You can see that it's actually going through the floor. So I'm going to have to cut the floor out to fit that anyway. And since the tire you see here is right on top of the fuel intake, that's going to have to go somewhere different later. But it was easy enough in SolidWorks to move around. I didn't really care. So this is the plan at this point. Finish up the roll cage, put seats in, put in the fuel cell, get the firewall figured out, get fire suppression figured out, and at that point register for races and start getting some experience with low risk or low commitment type stuff before going to the Baja 1000 or the Baja 500. And actually, from what I understand, even though the 500 has a lot less glory to it because it's half as amazing from a number standpoint as the 1000 is, since it's a loop race where most of the 1000s are linear, that means that the logistics of it are much less burdensome. It's a lot more reasonable to actually race the Baja 500 than the 1000 for all the people that actually chase you and try to provide technical support along the way. And if that stuff is just really not feasible in the short term, then doing like DNFing on the Everyman's Challenge and King of the Hammers is always an option to explore too. So that is kind of my goal. No, my goal is to race in the Baja 1000 eventually. Ideally, this is happening within the next year or two. There's a lot that has to happen between then and now, but this is an encouraging starting point, and it's really cool to actually see a plan come together on that. And everyone that's been helping make it happen, and all the people that have volunteered to be a part of it, and then the sponsors that have been involved or that are in conversation, is really cool too. So thank you guys for your time. Thank you for listening. This was kind of unpolished, especially at 4 a.m. in the morning. But there it is. That is what I'm working on right now. If you guys got any questions, this is the before. And the after is in process. Looking forward to race. Hope you guys have a good weekend. Stay healthy. Have a good time. Have a good one.